The inheritance of gods, she was the last pharaoh of Egypt, a woman whose beauty became legend, whose intelligence shaped empires, and whose death marked the end of 3,000 years of pharaonic rule. But what if I told you that everything you think you know about Cleopatra is probably wrong? The woman who seduced Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, who commanded fleets and ruled the richest kingdom on earth, who spoke 9 languages and was educated in mathematics, philosophy, and rhetoric. This was no mere seductress trading on her looks, but one of the most brilliant political minds of the ancient world, fighting desperately to save her kingdom from Roman conquest. Picture Alexandria in 51 BCE, the greatest city in the Mediterranean world, where the lighthouse that guides ships to harbor is one of the 7 wonders of the world, where the great library contains the accumulated knowledge of human civilization, where Greek scholars debate philosophy while Egyptian priests perform rituals that predate Moses by a millennium. This is the city that 18-year-old Cleopatra VII inherits when her father Ptolemy VII dies, leaving her a throne that has been occupied by her Greek Macedonian dynasty for 3 centuries, ever since Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy claimed Egypt as his prize after the great conqueror's death. But Cleopatra's inheritance is both magnificent and poisoned, a kingdom of unimaginable wealth built on foundations that grow more unstable with each passing year. Egypt remains the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, its grain feeding Rome's million citizens, its gold flowing from Nubian mines, its papyrus carrying the written word throughout the civilized world. Yet this prosperity depends increasingly on Roman goodwill, Roman trade agreements, and Roman military protection against enemies who circle like vultures around what they perceive to be a weakening prey. The Ptolemaic dynasty that Cleopatra represents has ruled Egypt through a combination of shrewd political maneuvering and deliberate cultural adaptation, presenting themselves to their Greek subjects as Hellenistic monarchs, while appearing to their Egyptian subjects as legitimate pharaohs, blessed by the gods. This dual identity requires constant balance. Too much emphasis on their Greek heritage alienates the native population, while too much identification with Egyptian traditions makes them seem backward to the cosmopolitan elites of Alexandria, who provide much of their tax base and administrative expertise. Here's where I want to pause and ask you something that goes to the heart of cultural identity and political survival. From which country are you watching this video? Because what Cleopatra faces is a challenge that leaders throughout history have confronted when their nations exist at the crossroads of different civilizations. How do you maintain your cultural identity while adapting to external pressures? How do you balance tradition with the need for change? Drop your country in the comments and let me know if you've seen similar struggles in your own nation's history. Cleopatra's education prepares her for this complex political landscape in ways that set her apart from almost every other ruler of her era. Unlike most Ptolemaic pharaohs who never bothered to learn Egyptian, she masters not only the ancient language of her subjects, but also Hebrew, Arabic, Ethiopian, and several other tongues spoken within her diverse kingdom. Her tutors in Alexandria include some of the finest minds of the age: mathematicians who understand the principles of geometry and astronomy, philosophers trained in the schools of Athens, historians who can trace the rise and fall of empires, and rhetoricians who can teach her to sway audiences through the power of carefully crafted speech. But perhaps most importantly, Cleopatra receives training that her male predecessors had often neglected. She learns to think like an Egyptian pharaoh, not just a Macedonian monarch. She studies the religious texts that justify pharaonic authority, participates in the rituals that connect her to the divine order that has sustained Egypt for millennia, and travels throughout her kingdom to understand not just its wealth, but its people. This cultural grounding will prove crucial when she faces challenges that require her to mobilize not just Alexandria's cosmopolitan elite, but the entire Egyptian nation in defense of their independence. The political situation that Cleopatra inherits in 51 BCE is precarious in ways that require immediate attention and long-term strategic thinking. Rome has been expanding its influence throughout the Mediterranean for 2 centuries, absorbing kingdoms either through direct conquest or by transforming them into client states that maintain the appearance of independence while accepting Roman oversight of their major policies. Egypt has avoided this fate partly through its geographic advantages. The Nile Delta provides natural defenses, the desert isolates the kingdom from easy land-based invasion, and the complexity of Egyptian agriculture requires local expertise that foreign administrators struggle to master. More crucially, Egypt's wealth has made it valuable enough that competing Roman factions prefer to court its alliance rather than risk the disruption that conquest might bring. The kingdom's grain exports feed Rome's urban population, preventing the food shortages that could trigger riots and political upheaval. Its luxury goods, silk, spices, precious stones, and exotic animals satisfy the appetites of Roman elites who have grown accustomed to levels of comfort and sophistication that depend on international trade networks. Its strategic position controls access to the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean trade routes that bring Eastern wealth to Mediterranean markets. But this same wealth makes Egypt tempting to ambitious Romans who see its conquest as a path to the resources necessary for political advancement in the competitive world of late Republican politics. The Roman civil wars that dominate the 1st century BCE create opportunities for Egyptian diplomacy. Supporting the winning side can secure the kingdom's independence, but backing the wrong faction means facing the victor's vengeance. Cleopatra's father had navigated these dangerous waters by paying enormous bribes to influential Romans and accepting a level of Roman interference that many Egyptians found humiliating. The immediate crisis that confronts Cleopatra upon her accession involves not foreign enemies but domestic rebellion, as her younger brother Ptolemy III challenges her right to rule according to traditional Ptolemaic succession practices that often involve sibling rivalry escalating into civil war. The Ptolemaic custom of royal marriage between siblings, designed to keep power within the family and prevent the kind of succession disputes that had weakened other Hellenistic kingdoms, has instead created a system where brothers and sisters compete for sole authority through methods ranging from political intrigue to outright assassination. Ptolemy III, though only 10 years old, represents a faction within the Alexandrian court that believes Egypt's survival requires closer cooperation with Rome and less emphasis on the kingdom's Egyptian identity. His advisors, led by the eunuch Pothinus and the general Achillas, argue that Cleopatra's cultural policies alienate potential Roman supporters who see her Egyptian religious activities as evidence of primitive superstition incompatible with civilized governance. They advocate for a more conventionally Hellenistic approach to kingship, one that emphasizes Egypt's Greek heritage and downplays its pharaonic traditions. This fundamental disagreement about Egypt's cultural and political direction transforms what might have been a routine succession dispute into a debate about the kingdom's future identity and survival strategy. Cleopatra believes that Egypt's strength lies in its unique synthesis of Greek intellectual culture and Egyptian spiritual traditions, creating a civilization that can compete with Rome on terms of sophistication while drawing on loyalties that no foreign power can replicate. Her opponents argue that this approach is outdated, that survival in the Roman-dominated Mediterranean requires abandoning outdated traditions in favor of the kind of rational, secular governance that Romans respect and understand. The civil war that erupts between Cleopatra and Ptolemy III in 48 BCE forces the young queen into exile, just as the broader Roman civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey Magnus reaches its climax. Caesar's pursuit of Pompey across the Mediterranean brings Roman armies to Egypt at the moment when the kingdom is least capable of presenting a united front to foreign intervention. The stage is set for a confrontation that will determine not only who rules Egypt, but whether Egypt will continue to exist as an independent kingdom or become another province in Rome's expanding empire. Cleopatra, driven from Alexandria, but not from ambition, begins planning her return from exile in ways that demonstrate both her political intelligence and her willingness to take enormous risks in pursuit of her goals. She understands that her kingdom's survival depends not just on military victory over her brother, but on establishing a relationship with Rome that preserves Egyptian independence while acknowledging Roman supremacy in Mediterranean affairs. The question is whether such a balance is possible and whether she possesses the political skill necessary to achieve it. The dice are cast, the players are in position, and the fate of the last great independent kingdom in the ancient world hangs in the balance. Cleopatra's story is about to become not just the biography of a remarkable woman, but the final chapter in the history of Pharaonic Egypt, a 3,000-year-old civilization facing its ultimate test of adaptability and survival. The meeting that changed the world, the autumn of 48 BCE, finds Julius Caesar pursuing his great rival Pompey Magnus across a Mediterranean world torn apart by civil war, their personal and political conflict having escalated from senatorial debates to a struggle that engulfs the entire Roman sphere of influence. Caesar's victory at Pharsalus in central Greece has effectively decided the outcome of their war, but Pompey's escape to Egypt means that the fighting must continue until one man lies dead and the other can claim undisputed mastery over the Roman world. What neither Roman general realizes is that their arrival in Egyptian waters will transform a foreign civil war into the catalyst for the most famous love affair in history and the beginning of the end for the last independent kingdom. In the ancient Mediterranean, Pompey's decision to seek refuge in Egypt appears strategically sound. He had supported Ptolemy XII's restoration to the throne years earlier. Egyptian wealth could finance continued resistance to Caesar, and the kingdom's military resources might provide the foundation for a comeback that could reverse his recent defeats. But the young Ptolemy III and his advisors, calculating that Caesar's victory makes him the more valuable ally, choose to eliminate Pompey rather than harbor him, believing that presenting Caesar with his rival's head will earn them Roman gratitude and guarantee their kingdom's independence under the new order that Caesar represents. The murder of Pompey, as he steps ashore at Pelusium, represents a catastrophic miscalculation that reveals the Ptolemaic court's fundamental misunderstanding of Roman political culture and personal honor. Rather than appreciating their elimination of his rival, Caesar is horrified by the assassination of a man who had been his son-in-law and partner in the first triumvirate, a Roman of the highest rank whose death by Egyptian treachery violates every principle of civilized warfare and diplomatic protocol. When Ptolemy's representatives present him with Pompey's head and signet ring, Caesar's reaction, tears of genuine grief and rage at the undignified end of a great Roman, signals that their attempt to curry favor has instead earned them his enmity. Caesar's decision to winter in Alexandria rather than immediately departing for Rome creates an opportunity that the exiled Cleopatra recognizes and seizes with the kind of bold audacity that defines her entire career. Understanding that direct negotiation with Caesar represents her only chance to regain her throne and save her kingdom from the consequences of her brother's blunder, she devises a plan that combines theatrical flair with careful psychological calculation. The famous story of her smuggling herself into Caesar's presence wrapped in a carpet or linen bag demonstrates not frivolous romanticism, but sophisticated political intelligence. She needs to meet Caesar privately, away from her, brothers, spies, and advisors, where she can present her case without interference. The meeting between Caesar and Cleopatra in the palace at Alexandria brings together two of the most remarkable political minds of the ancient world, at a moment when both face challenges that require all their intelligence and creativity to overcome. Caesar, at 52, is the master of the Roman world, but faces the enormous task of transforming a republic built for governing a single city into an empire capable of administering dozens of provinces and millions of subjects. His years of military campaigning have given him unparalleled experience in leadership and administration. But the political settlement he creates must satisfy competing factions whose cooperation is essential for long-term stability. Cleopatra, at 21, possesses the kind of education and cultural sophistication that few rulers of any era have enjoyed. Combined with the desperate urgency that comes from knowing her kingdom's survival depends entirely on the decisions made in the next few weeks. Her fluency in multiple languages allows her to converse with Caesar in Latin as easily as Greek, while her knowledge of philosophy, mathematics, and history provides common ground for intellectual exchange that transcends mere diplomatic negotiation. More importantly, her deep understanding of Egyptian culture and religion gives her insights into the administration of complex, diverse societies that Caesar needs as he contemplates the challenges of governing his expanded empire. But the attraction between Caesar and Cleopatra involves more than political convenience or intellectual compatibility. It represents the meeting of two extraordinary personalities who recognize in each other the kind of ambition, intelligence, and vision that they have rarely encountered in their contemporaries. Caesar has spent his career surrounded by Roman senators whose horizons rarely extend beyond the next election cycle, and whose understanding of governance is limited by their experience of republican institutions designed for a much simpler world. Cleopatra offers him a partner who thinks in terms of centuries rather than years, who understands that lasting power requires more than military conquest, and who possesses the cultural knowledge necessary to bridge the gap between East and West that Roman expansion has created. Here's something I want you to think about, and this applies regardless of which country you're watching from. How often do we see relationships between powerful people that combine genuine personal attraction with strategic political calculation? Caesar and Cleopatra's partnership works because it serves both their emotional needs and their practical objectives, creating a bond that is simultaneously intimate and instrumental. From your perspective, watching from wherever you are in the world, have you observed similar relationships in modern politics where personal and political motivations become intertwined? What do you think makes such partnerships successful or dangerous? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The political alliance that Caesar and Cleopatra forged during the winter of 48-47 BCE transforms the balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean, while establishing precedents that will influence Roman imperial policy for centuries to come. Caesar's decision to support Cleopatra against her brother requires military intervention that commits Roman forces to Egyptian domestic politics, creating the kind of entanglement that Republican tradition had sought to avoid. But Caesar recognizes that Egypt's wealth and strategic position make it too important to leave in the hands of unreliable allies, while Cleopatra's cultural sophistication and administrative competence make her a more valuable partner than her brother's faction of inexperienced courtiers and opportunistic generals. The Alexandrian War that follows. Caesar's declaration of support for Cleopatra demonstrates both the military challenges of urban warfare in the ancient world and the political complexities that arise when foreign intervention intersects with domestic civil conflict. Ptolemy XIII's forces, led by the general Achilles and supported by the Alexandrian mob, possess numerical superiority and local knowledge that make them formidable opponents despite Caesar's superior training and equipment. The fighting spreads throughout the city, turning Alexandria's magnificent public buildings into fortified positions and transforming its famous cultural institutions into military assets or collateral damage. The destruction of part of the great library during the fighting becomes a symbol of how political conflicts can damage the very cultural achievements they claim to protect. As scrolls containing irreplaceable works of literature, philosophy, and science are consumed by fires set during street battles between Roman legionaries and Egyptian defenders. The irony is profound. Caesar and Cleopatra, both cultured individuals who value learning and artistic achievement, find themselves presiding over the destruction of texts and artworks that represent the pinnacle of ancient intellectual accomplishment. But The military campaign also demonstrates the effectiveness of the political alliance that Caesar and Cleopatra have created, as her knowledge of Egyptian geography and culture proves invaluable in organizing resistance to her brother's rebellion. Her ability to communicate with Egyptian priests and local officials in their own language allows Caesar to secure support from communities that might otherwise have remained neutral or hostile to foreign intervention. Her understanding of Egyptian religious symbolism helps Caesar present his intervention as the restoration of legitimate pharaonic authority rather than foreign conquest, a crucial distinction that influences popular opinion throughout the Nile Valley. The arrival of reinforcements led by Mithridates of Pergamon finally tips the balance in favor of Caesar and Cleopatra, demonstrating how their alliance fits into the broader pattern of Roman imperial expansion that relies on local partners to provide legitimacy and cultural expertise. The decisive victory at the Battle of the Nile not only secures Cleopatra's throne, but establishes the template for Roman-Egyptian relations that will persist through the reigns of her successors. Formal independence combined with practical dependence. Cultural autonomy balanced by strategic subordination. The death of Ptolemy III, whether by drowning in the Nile during his attempted escape or by execution after his capture, eliminates the immediate threat to Cleopatra's rule while demonstrating the ruthless efficiency with which both Caesar and Cleopatra deal with political obstacles. Neither ruler can afford the kind of magnanimity that might be appropriate in more secure circumstances. Too much is at stake, too many enemies remain to be defeated, and too many precedents must be established for the future governance of their respective domains. The celebration of their victory includes the famous Nile cruise that Caesar and Cleopatra take together, a journey that serves multiple purposes beyond simple pleasure or romance. For Caesar, it provides an opportunity to survey the kingdom whose wealth will help finance his future campaigns and political projects, while demonstrating to Egyptian audiences that their new pharaoh enjoys the support of Rome's most powerful general. For Cleopatra, it offers a chance to present herself throughout Egypt as a legitimate pharaoh blessed by the gods and protected by foreign allies, while showing Caesar the sources of Egyptian prosperity that make her kingdom such a valuable partner. But, perhaps most importantly, the cruise allows both leaders to plan their long-term strategy for managing the relationship between Rome and Egypt in ways that serve both their personal ambitions and their people's interests. The conversations they have while sailing past temples and monuments that predate Rome by millennia shape decisions that will influence the course of ancient history, as they work out the details of an alliance that must balance Roman supremacy. With Egyptian autonomy, personal affection with political necessity, and immediate tactical advantages with long-term strategic objectives. The birth of Caesarion in 47 BCE provides both the ultimate symbol of the Caesar-Cleopatra alliance and a potential complication that could threaten the delicate balance they have created between their personal relationship and their political partnership. The child represents the biological fusion of Roman and Egyptian royal bloodlines, creating dynastic possibilities that could either strengthen their alliance or provide enemies with ammunition for attacks on both their legitimacy and their judgment. The Golden Age of Alexandria. The restoration of Cleopatra to her throne in 47 BCE inaugurates what will later be remembered as the final Golden Age of Ptolemaic Egypt, a period when the kingdom's ancient wealth combines with Roman military protection to create a brief renaissance of art, learning, and architectural achievement that rivals the greatest periods of pharaonic history. Cleopatra, secure in her power and confident in her alliance with the master of the Roman world, embarks on an ambitious program of internal reform and cultural patronage that demonstrates her vision of Egypt as more than just a Roman client state, but as a worthy partner in the creation of a Mediterranean civilization that synthesizes the best elements of Greek, Roman, and Egyptian culture. The rebuilding of Alexandria, following the damage inflicted during the Civil War, becomes a showcase for the kind of collaborative project that Cleopatra envisions for the broader relationship between Egypt and Rome. Roman engineers contribute their expertise in concrete construction and hydraulic engineering, while Egyptian craftsmen provide the artistic skills and cultural knowledge necessary to create buildings that serve practical purposes while maintaining the aesthetic standards that have made Alexandria famous throughout the Mediterranean world. The result is an architectural synthesis that influences building styles throughout the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire and establishes precedents for the kind of cultural fusion that will characterize the imperial period. The restoration and expansion of the Great Library becomes Cleopatra's most visible statement about her kingdom's commitment to intellectual achievement and cultural leadership, as she recruits scholars from throughout the Mediterranean world to replace texts lost during the fighting and expand the collection in new directions that reflect contemporary interests in natural philosophy, geography, and applied mathematics. The stipends she offers to distinguished scholars make Alexandria once again the most attractive destination for ambitious intellectuals, while her personal participation in philosophical discussions and scientific experiments demonstrates that royal patronage involves genuine intellectual engagement rather than mere ceremonial support. But Cleopatra's cultural program serves political as well as intellectual purposes, as she uses her kingdom's renewed prosperity to demonstrate that Egyptian civilization remains capable of achievements that command respect throughout the ancient world. The festivals she sponsors blend traditional Egyptian religious observances with Greek artistic competitions and Roman-style gladiatorial games, creating events that appeal to Alexandria's diverse population while showcasing the kingdom's ability to integrate different cultural traditions into a coherent whole. These celebrations send a message to both domestic and foreign audiences that Egypt under Cleopatra represents not the declining remnant of an obsolete civilization, but a dynamic, forward-looking kingdom capable of adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining its essential character. The economic policies that Cleopatra implements during this period reflect her understanding that Egypt's independence depends ultimately on the kingdom's ability to generate sufficient wealth to finance its own defense and maintain the lifestyle necessary to compete for influence with other Mediterranean powers. Her reforms of tax collection, trade regulation, and agricultural administration demonstrate sophisticated grasp of the relationship between economic prosperity and political autonomy, while her investment in infrastructure projects like harbor improvements and irrigation systems shows recognition that short-term expenditures can generate long-term increases in productive capacity. The expansion of Egypt's trading networks during Cleopatra's reign brings unprecedented prosperity to merchants and craftsmen throughout the kingdom, while demonstrating the advantages that come from combining Egyptian commercial expertise with Roman military protection. Caravans protected by Roman-trained Egyptian forces can travel safely through regions that had previously been too dangerous for regular commerce, while Egyptian ships operating under agreements negotiated with Roman naval commanders gain access to markets that had been effectively closed during the period of civil conflict. The result is an economic boom that generates tax revenues sufficient to finance both domestic projects and the diplomatic gifts necessary to maintain good relations with influential Romans. The religious policies that Cleopatra pursues during this period demonstrate her sophisticated understanding of how spiritual authority can reinforce political power while providing emotional satisfaction to populations that might otherwise feel alienated by rapid social and economic changes. Her restoration of temples damaged during the Civil War serves practical purposes by providing employment for craftsmen and demonstrating royal concern for traditional institutions. But it also reinforces her legitimacy as a pharaoh, blessed by the gods and responsible for maintaining the cosmic order that ensures Egypt's prosperity and security. Cleopatra's personal participation in religious ceremonies throughout Egypt during this period reflects both genuine piety and calculated political strategy, as she travels from Alexandria to Memphis to Thebes, appearing in traditional pharaonic regalia while performing rituals that connect her to the divine authority that has legitimized Egyptian kingship for thousands of years. These appearances serve multiple audiences. Egyptian subjects see confirmation that their ruler respects the traditions that define their cultural identity, while Roman observers witness demonstrations of the kind of popular loyalty that makes Egypt a valuable ally rather than a potential source of rebellion and instability. The intellectual atmosphere that develops in Alexandria during Cleopatra's reign attracts scholars and artists from throughout the Mediterranean world, creating a cosmopolitan cultural environment that influences developments in philosophy, science, and literature for generations to come. The Queen's own scholarship, she reportedly wrote treatises on mathematics, medicine, and chemistry, though none survive, establishes her as more than just a patron of learning, but as an active participant in the intellectual life of her kingdom. Her ability to conduct discussions in multiple languages allows her to engage directly with scholars from different cultural backgrounds, while her access to the royal library's resources makes her palace a center for research and intellectual exchange. The artistic achievements of Cleopatra's court reflect the same synthesis of different cultural traditions that characterizes her political and economic policies, as Egyptian themes are expressed through Greek artistic techniques while incorporating Roman preferences for realistic portraiture and narrative complexity. The coins minted during her reign present her image in ways that emphasize both her beauty and her intelligence, while the sculptures and paintings created for her palaces demonstrate the high level of artistic skill that royal patronage can support when resources are abundant and cultural ambitions are high. But perhaps most importantly, the period of Cleopatra's sole rule demonstrates her capacity for effective administration and strategic thinking that goes far beyond the seductive charms for which she is primarily remembered in popular culture. Her judicial reforms streamline legal procedures while maintaining traditional protections for different ethnic and religious communities within her diverse kingdom. Her military reorganization creates forces capable of maintaining internal security and defending against external threats while avoiding the expense of maintaining larger armies that might drain resources needed for economic development and cultural projects. The diplomatic initiatives that Cleopatra pursues during this period establish Egypt as a significant player in Mediterranean politics, despite the kingdom's formal subordination to Roman authority, as she negotiates agreements with other client kingdoms and maintains correspondence with influential Romans that demonstrates her continued relevance to imperial policymaking. Her ability to provide intelligence about Eastern affairs, facilitate trade between different regions, and mediate disputes between competing factions makes her a valuable partner whose counsel Roman leaders seek on matters extending far beyond purely Egyptian concerns. The birth and early childhood of Caesarion during this period creates both opportunities and complications for Cleopatra's long-term planning, as the child represents potential future legitimacy for her dynasty while also serving as a living reminder of her relationship with Caesar that could become politically embarrassing if circumstances change. Her careful management of the child's education and public appearances demonstrates the same political intelligence that characterizes all her major decisions as she works to maximize the advantages that come from his parentage while minimizing the risks that such prominence might create. The Golden Age of Alexandria under Cleopatra's rule establishes standards for cultural achievement and administrative competence that will influence Egyptian aspirations long after the kingdom's independence has ended, creating memories of prosperity and cultural leadership that survive in both historical records and popular imagination. But this achievement also creates expectations and establishes precedents that will make Egypt's eventual subordination to direct Roman rule more traumatic and psychologically devastating than it might otherwise have been. The success of Cleopatra's domestic policies during this period demonstrates that given favorable circumstances, the Ptolemaic system of government remained capable of effective administration and cultural leadership that could benefit Egypt's diverse population while maintaining the kingdom's position as a significant Mediterranean power. But this success also depends on continued Roman support and protection that could be withdrawn if political circumstances in Rome change, or if new leaders emerge with different priorities and different assessments of Egypt's strategic value. Caesar's queen. In Rome, the year 46 BCE witnesses one of the most audacious political moves in ancient history as Cleopatra, secure in her Egyptian throne but ambitious for something far greater, accepts Caesar's invitation to visit Rome as his honored guest and unofficial consort. The journey from Alexandria to the Eternal City represents more than mere travel between capitals. It symbolizes the collision between two fundamentally different concepts of power, governance, and civilization that will determine the future shape of the Mediterranean world. Cleopatra arrives not as a supplicant seeking Roman favor, but as the queen of the richest kingdom on earth, bringing with her the accumulated wisdom of 3 millennia of Egyptian civilization and the confident expectation that Rome will recognize her as an equal partner in the creation of a new world order. The Rome that Cleopatra encounters in 46 BCE is a city transformed by civil war and military conquest into something unprecedented in human history. A metropolis of over 1 million inhabitants drawn from every corner of the known world. A political center where decisions made in senate houses and private villas determine the fate of entire nations. An economic hub where the wealth of dozens of provinces flows in an endless stream of tribute, taxes, and trade goods that make possible levels of luxury and sophistication that dwarf even Alexandria's famous extravagance. But beneath this surface, prosperity lies a political system under enormous strain, as republican institutions designed for governing a single city struggle to cope with the administrative and military challenges of ruling an empire that spans 3 continents. Caesar's decision to invite Cleopatra to Rome serves multiple purposes that reflect both his personal affection for her and his sophisticated understanding of the political challenges facing his regime. Her presence provides tangible evidence of his success in bringing the wealthy Eastern kingdoms into alliance with Rome, while her exotic appeal and legendary intelligence make her a living trophy whose mere existence validates his claims to have surpassed all previous Roman achievements. More practically, her knowledge of administration, diplomacy, and statecraft could prove invaluable as Caesar contemplates the constitutional reforms necessary to transform the Roman Republic into an empire capable of governing the Mediterranean world effectively and permanently. The villa that Caesar provides for Cleopatra across the Tiber becomes an alternative court that attracts ambitious Romans, curious intellectuals, and foreign ambassadors eager to experience the kind of sophisticated, cultural atmosphere that Alexandria has made famous throughout the ancient world. Her dinner parties become legendary not just for their luxury, but for the quality of conversation they generate, as Greek philosophers debate with Roman historians, while Egyptian priests explain the mysteries of their ancient religion to fascinated audiences who have never encountered spiritual traditions that predate their own civilization by thousands of years. But Cleopatra's presence in Rome also creates political complications that threaten to undermine Caesar's carefully constructed image as a Roman leader serving Roman interests, as his enemies seize upon his relationship with the Egyptian queen as evidence that he has been corrupted by foreign influence and Oriental luxury. The propaganda war that develops around their partnership reflects deeper Roman anxieties about cultural contamination and political independence that will shape imperial attitudes toward Eastern kingdoms for centuries to come, while also demonstrating the sophisticated use of personal attacks and cultural prejudices in ancient political competition. The birth of Caesarion and his presence in Caesar's household provides both powerful symbolism and dangerous ammunition for political enemies who can portray the child as evidence of Caesar's desire to establish a dynasty that combines Roman military power with Egyptian wealth and Eastern ideas about divine kingship. The boy's existence raises questions about succession and legitimacy that strike at the heart of Republican ideology, while also offering tantalizing possibilities for the kind of East-West synthesis that both Caesar and Cleopatra seem to envision for the Mediterranean's future. Here's something that I think applies to political relationships across cultures and time periods. The challenge that Caesar and Cleopatra face in managing their partnership demonstrates how personal relationships between powerful people become public political statements, whether they want them to or not. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably observed how modern leaders' personal lives become subjects of political debate and cultural commentary. What do you think about the way private relationships between political figures get transformed into public symbols? How do you think leaders should balance their personal desires with their public responsibilities? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The cultural exchange that takes place during Cleopatra's residence in Rome influences artistic, architectural, and intellectual development in ways that persist long after her departure, as Roman artists incorporate Egyptian motifs into their work, while Roman intellectuals gain access to philosophical and scientific texts that had previously been available only in Alexandria. The fusion of styles and ideas that results from this exchange contributes to the development of what will later be called Imperial Roman culture, a synthesis that combines Roman political and military traditions with Greek intellectual sophistication and Eastern spiritual and artistic elements. Cleopatra's interactions with influential Roman women during her stay provide insights into the different roles and expectations that elite women face in Egyptian versus Roman society, while also creating opportunities for political influence that extend beyond her formal relationship with Caesar. Her conversations with Fulvia, Calpurnia, and other prominent Roman matrons demonstrate her ability to navigate complex social hierarchies while maintaining her dignity as a reigning queen, even as these relationships provide channels for informal diplomacy that complement her official status as an allied sovereign. The religious and cultural ceremonies that Cleopatra sponsors during her Roman residence introduce Roman audiences to Egyptian spiritual traditions and artistic achievements that many had previously known only through distorted reports and hostile stereotypes. Her dedication of a golden statue to Venus in Caesar's new forum creates a lasting monument to their partnership, while also establishing a precedent for the kind of religious syncretism that will characterize the imperial period, as Eastern deities become incorporated into Roman spiritual life through processes of identification and adaptation. The political discussions that take place between Caesar and Cleopatra during this period shape plans for constitutional reform and imperial administration that will influence Roman development for generations to come, even though many of their specific proposals die with Caesar and must be rediscovered by later emperors facing similar challenges. Their conversations about the relationship between central authority and local autonomy, the role of cultural diversity within political unity, and the challenges of governing vast territories with diverse populations provide insights that will prove crucial as Rome transitions from republic to empire. The economic arrangements that Caesar and Cleopatra negotiate during her Roman visit establish trading relationships and financial agreements that demonstrate the practical benefits of their political alliance, while also creating precedents for the kind of systematic exploitation of provincial resources that will characterize later imperial policy. Egypt's grain shipments to Rome become regularized and expanded, while Roman manufactured goods gain privileged access to Egyptian markets in arrangements that benefit both kingdoms while making their economies increasingly interdependent. Intelligence networks that Cleopatra establishes during her Roman residence provide her with information about Roman political developments that prove crucial for her subsequent decision-making, while also giving Caesar access to Egyptian knowledge about Eastern affairs that enhances his ability to plan military campaigns and diplomatic initiatives. The exchange of information and expertise that results from their partnership creates capabilities that neither could achieve independently, while also establishing patterns of cooperation that will influence Roman-Egyptian relations throughout the imperial period. But the growing opposition to Caesar's rule, and particularly to what his enemies portray as his subjugation to foreign influence, creates an increasingly dangerous atmosphere that threatens both his political position and Cleopatra's safety. The conspiracy that forms around Brutus and Cassius draws much of its emotional power from the claim that Caesar has abandoned Roman values in favor of Eastern despotism, with Cleopatra serving as the visible symbol of this alleged corruption and transformation. The tension between Caesar's public role as a Roman leader and his private relationship with an Eastern queen becomes increasingly difficult to manage as opposition to his rule intensifies and rivals seek ammunition that can be used to undermine his popular support. The delicate balance that both have tried to maintain between their personal affection and their political necessities begins to break down under the pressure of Roman Republican ideology and the practical requirements of maintaining power in an increasingly hostile environment. The Ides of March approach with ominous portents that both Caesar and Cleopatra seem to sense, but neither can fully interpret or prevent, as the political forces they have set in motion develop momentum that may prove impossible to control or redirect. The golden age they have created through their partnership has generated both achievements and enemies, successes and reactions that will determine not only their personal fates, but the future of the entire Mediterranean world. The Ides of March and after. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March 44 BCE shatters not only the life of the most powerful man in the ancient world, but the carefully constructed political architecture that he and Cleopatra have, built to manage the relationship between Rome and the East. The 23 knife wounds that end Caesar's life in the theater of Pompey transform the Mediterranean political landscape in ways that no single event has done since Alexander the Great's death 3 centuries earlier, creating a power vacuum that will draw ambitious Romans into conflicts that reshape the ancient world and determine whether Cleopatra's Egypt can survive as an independent kingdom or must submit to direct Roman rule. Cleopatra, residing in her villa across the Tiber when the assassination occurs, faces an immediate crisis that tests every aspect of her political intelligence and survival. Cleopatra, residing in her villa across the Tiber when the assassination occurs, faces an immediate crisis that tests every aspect of her political intelligence and survival instincts. The conspirators have struck not only at Caesar, but at the entire system of alliances and agreements that have guaranteed Egypt's independence and prosperity. Her position in Rome becomes untenable overnight. She is no longer the honored guest of the master of the Mediterranean, but a foreign queen whose presence reminds everyone of the dead dictator's alleged corruption by Eastern influence. The mob that celebrates Caesar's death in the Roman streets sees her as a symbol of everything they believe was wrong with his rule, while the conspirators view her as a potential rallying point for Caesar's supporters and a living reminder of the policies they have killed him to end. The speed with which Cleopatra organizes her departure from Rome demonstrates the same decisive leadership that has characterized her entire career, as she recognizes that remaining in the city would serve no purpose beyond providing her enemies with a convenient target for their anger and frustration. But her withdrawal is not a panicked flight. It is a strategic retreat that allows her to preserve her resources, protect her son Caesarion, and return to Egypt, where she can assess the new political situation from a position of relative strength and security. The ships that carry her household back to Alexandria also transport the accumulated knowledge, connections, and insights that will prove crucial as she navigates the chaos that follows Caesar's death. The political situation that emerges in Rome following the assassination creates both dangers and opportunities for Cleopatra's long-term strategy, as the Republican conspirators discover that killing Caesar has not restored the old constitutional order, but has instead unleashed forces that threaten to tear the Roman world apart. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant and co-consul, survives the conspiracy to become the most powerful man in Rome, but his authority faces immediate challenges from Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and grandnephew, whose claim to leadership rests on his legal status as the dictator's son rather than his military or political experience. The formation of the Second Triumvirate between Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus in 43 BCE creates a power-sharing arrangement that temporarily stabilizes Roman politics while preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Brutus, Cassius, and the other conspirators who have fled to the eastern provinces to organize resistance. But this alliance also establishes a precedent for the kind of personal rule that will ultimately destroy the Roman Republic and transform it into an empire ruled by a single individual with unlimited power and divine pretensions. Cleopatra's initial response to these developments demonstrates her sophisticated understanding of Roman politics and her ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances while maintaining focus on her fundamental objective of preserving Egyptian independence. Rather than immediately choosing sides in the emerging conflict, she adopts a policy of cautious neutrality that allows her to maintain communication with all factions while avoiding commitments that might prove disastrous if the political balance shifts unexpectedly. This approach reflects not indecision, but strategic patience, the recognition that premature involvement in Roman civil wars could destroy Egypt regardless of which faction ultimately proves victorious. The prescription lists that the triumvirs, published in 42 BCE, condemning hundreds of senators and wealthy Romans to death and confiscation of property, demonstrate the ruthless efficiency with which Caesar's heirs deal with their political enemies, while also creating opportunities for Cleopatra to demonstrate her value as an ally. Egyptian gold helps finance the triumvirs' military preparations, while Alexandria provides sanctuary for Romans whose wealth or connections make them valuable additions to Cleopatra's intelligence network and diplomatic capabilities. Here's something that I think shows the complexity of international politics in any era. Cleopatra has to balance her personal grief for Caesar with the practical necessities of protecting her kingdom's interests in a rapidly changing political environment. From which country are you watching this? Because leaders throughout history have faced similar challenges when personal relationships intersect with national survival. How do you think modern leaders handle situations where their personal feelings conflict with their political responsibilities? What would you do if you had to choose between loyalty to a friend and the welfare of your country? Share your thoughts in the comments. The Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, where Antony and Octavian defeat the forces of Brutus and Cassius, eliminates the Republican opposition and establishes the triumvirs as the undisputed masters of the Roman world. But it also creates new tensions within their alliance as they compete for prestige, resources, and influence over the territories they have conquered together. The division of the Mediterranean world that follows their victory assigns the eastern provinces to Antony's administration, creating an opportunity for Cleopatra to re-establish Egypt's position as the dominant power in the region under the protection of Caesar's former lieutenant. Antony's summons to Cleopatra to meet him at Tarsus in 41 BCE ostensibly concerns her kingdom's contributions to the campaign against Brutus and Cassius, but both leaders understand that this encounter will determine the future relationship between Rome and Egypt and possibly the balance of power throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Antony needs Egyptian resources to consolidate his control over the vast territories assigned to his administration, while Cleopatra needs Roman protection to maintain her throne against internal challenges and external threats that have multiplied during the years of civil war. The famous meeting at Tarsus, where Cleopatra arrives dressed as Aphrodite aboard a golden barge with purple sails and silver oars, represents the same combination of theatrical spectacle and calculated political strategy that has characterized all her major diplomatic initiatives. The display serves multiple audiences. It demonstrates Egypt's continued wealth and sophistication to potential allies and enemies. It establishes Cleopatra as a worthy partner rather than a subordinate client, and it creates the kind of memorable impression that transforms routine diplomatic encounters into legendary events that influence popular opinion and political calculations. But beyond the famous spectacle lies a serious negotiation between two experienced political leaders who recognize that their partnership could reshape the balance of power in the Mediterranean world while serving their individual ambitions and their people's interests. Antony brings to the relationship his unrivaled military reputation, his control over Rome's eastern provinces, and his connections to the network of veterans and allies that had supported Caesar's regime. Cleopatra offers Egyptian wealth, administrative expertise, naval resources, and knowledge of Eastern affairs that could prove crucial as Antony contemplates campaigns against Parthia and other enemies on Rome's eastern frontier. The personal attraction that develops between Antony and Cleopatra during their extended negotiations in Tarsus and subsequently in Alexandria creates the same combination of romantic passion and political calculation that had characterized her relationship with Caesar, but with important differences that reflect both leaders' greater experience and the changed circumstances they face. Antony, at 42, has spent decades in military campaigns and political struggles that have given him sophisticated understanding of power and leadership, but he also carries emotional scars from years of civil war and personal losses that make him more vulnerable to the kind of emotional intensity that Cleopatra represents. Cleopatra, now 28, possesses the confidence and experience that come from nearly a decade of successful rule over one of the world's most complex kingdoms, combined with hard-won knowledge of Roman politics and the requirements for survival in a world dominated by competing military strongmen. Her relationship with Antony represents not the desperate gamble of a young queen seeking protection, but the calculated strategy of an experienced ruler who has identified the partnership most likely to preserve her kingdom's independence while advancing her dynasty's long-term interests. The winter that Antony spends in Alexandria in 4140 BCE recreates many of the same dynamics that had characterized Caesar and Cleopatra's partnership, as personal attraction combines with political necessity to create an alliance that serves both rulers' immediate needs while establishing precedents for the future administration of Rome's eastern territories. But this relationship develops in a context of greater urgency and higher stakes, as both leaders recognize that the triumvirate cannot survive indefinitely, and that eventual conflict between Antony and Octavian will determine not only their personal fates, but the future organization of the Roman world. The children born to Antony and Cleopatra, the twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene in 40 BCE, and later Ptolemy Philadelphus in 36 BCE, represent both the biological symbol of their partnership and potential dynastic complications that could influence Mediterranean politics for generations to come. Their births create possibilities for the kind of East-West synthesis that both parents seem to envision, while also providing hostages to fortune that could become liabilities if political circumstances change or if enemies seek leverage against their parents' alliance. But even as Antony and Cleopatra develop their personal and political partnership, events in the wider Roman world create pressures and complications that threaten to overwhelm their carefully constructed alliance and force them into conflicts they would prefer to avoid. The triumvirate crumbles. The delicate balance of power that holds the second triumvirate together begins to fracture almost immediately after the victory at Philippi, as Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus discover that shared enemies are easier to manage than shared authority over the vast territories and resources of the Roman world. The personal ambitions, competing visions, and mutual suspicions that had been suppressed during their campaign against Caesar's assassins now emerge with renewed force, creating tensions that will ultimately destroy their alliance and plunge the Mediterranean into another round of civil war more devastating than any that has come before. Lepidus, the weakest member of the triumvirate, finds himself increasingly marginalized as his more dynamic partners divide the most important provinces and military commands between themselves, leaving him with Africa and a token role in major policy decisions. His attempts to assert greater authority only serve to demonstrate his military and political limitations, while also providing Octavian and Antony with opportunities to cooperate in reducing his influence and dividing his resources between themselves. The triumvirate that began as a partnership among equals gradually evolves into a bipolar competition for supremacy that cannot be resolved through negotiation or compromise. The Perusian War of 4140 BCE, where Octavian defeats forces loyal to Antony's wife Fulvia and his brother Lucius, demonstrates how quickly personal conflicts can escalate into military confrontations that threaten to tear apart even the most carefully constructed political alliances. Although Antony himself does not participate in the fighting, he is in the east, organizing his territories and developing his relationship with Cleopatra. The war creates precedents and grievances that poison the atmosphere between the two remaining triumvirs and make future cooperation increasingly difficult to sustain. The Treaty of Brundisium in 40 BCE temporarily repairs the alliance between Antony and Octavian through a new division of territories and responsibilities that gives Antony undisputed control over the east while confirming Octavian's authority in the west. But this agreement also includes provisions that create new sources of tension and conflict. Antony's marriage to Octavian's sister Octavia, designed to cement their renewed partnership through family ties, instead creates a situation where his personal relationships with both his Roman wife and his Egyptian partner become subjects of political scrutiny and propaganda warfare. The challenge of managing simultaneous relationships with Octavia and Cleopatra tests Antony's political skills and personal integrity in ways that ultimately prove impossible to sustain successfully, as each woman represents not just individual affection but entire civilizations with competing claims on his loyalty and attention. Octavia embodies traditional Roman values of matrimonial fidelity and domestic virtue, while Cleopatra represents the sophisticated cosmopolitanism and cultural richness of the Hellenistic East. The choice between them becomes symbolic of larger questions about Rome's future direction and cultural identity that extend far beyond Antony's personal preferences. Cleopatra's response to Antony's Roman marriage demonstrates the same political intelligence and emotional resilience that have characterized her entire career, as she recognizes that direct confrontation with his legal obligations would serve no purpose beyond alienating him from his Roman supporters and undermining their partnership's strategic value. Instead, she adopts a policy of patient waiting, combined with continued demonstration of Egypt's value as an ally, understanding that political circumstances will eventually force Antony to choose between his competing loyalties and that her kingdom's resources make her the more valuable long-term partner. The Parthian campaign that occupies much of Antony's attention during the late 30s BCE provides both an opportunity to demonstrate his military capabilities and a source of complications that drain resources while failing to achieve the decisive victories necessary to enhance his prestige and political position. The defeats and setbacks he suffers in these eastern campaigns create ammunition for Octavian's propaganda, while also demonstrating the limitations of traditional Roman military tactics when applied to the kind of mobile warfare that Parthian forces have perfected over generations of conflict with various Western invaders. Here's something that I think applies to political and military leaders in any era. Antony's challenge in balancing his various responsibilities and relationships shows how success in one area can create problems in others, especially when leaders try to satisfy competing constituencies with conflicting demands. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably seen similar situations where political leaders struggle to maintain multiple alliances or fulfill contradictory promises. What do you think are the keys to managing these kinds of complex political situations? How do leaders decide which relationships to prioritize when they can't satisfy everyone? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE, where Antony and Cleopatra stage an elaborate ceremony distributing Eastern territories among their children and proclaiming their vision for the future organization. of the Mediterranean world, represents their most direct challenge to Octavian's authority and their clearest statement of an alternative model for Roman imperial development. The event combines traditional pharaonic ceremonial with Hellenistic royal symbolism to create a spectacle that asserts Egypt's continuing importance while also establishing dynastic claims that could influence Mediterranean politics for generations to come. But the donations also provide Octavian with powerful propaganda ammunition, as he can portray Antony's actions as evidence of his complete subjugation to foreign influence and his abandonment of Roman interests in favor of Eastern luxury and Oriental despotism. The ceremony's theatrical elements, while effective in demonstrating wealth and power to Eastern audiences, seem alien and threatening to Roman sensibilities that value republican simplicity over monarchical display, creating political vulnerabilities that skilled opponents can exploit effectively. The gradual deterioration of relations between Antony and Octavian during the mid-30s BCE reflects not just personal animosity, but fundamental disagreements about the future direction of Roman civilization and imperial policy. Antony's vision seems to embrace cultural diversity and administrative flexibility, allowing different regions to maintain their traditional institutions while contributing to the overall strength and prosperity of the empire. Octavian's approach emphasizes Roman supremacy and cultural uniformity, seeking to transform conquered territories into extensions of Roman civilization rather than partners in a multicultural confederation. These competing visions create irreconcilable differences that make peaceful coexistence between the two men increasingly impossible, as each represents not just individual ambition, but entire philosophies of government and cultural development that cannot be reconciled through compromise or power-sharing arrangements. The civil war that erupts between them in 32 BCE represents more than personal rivalry. It is a contest between different models of imperial organization that will determine the character of Roman civilization for centuries to come. The propaganda. War that precedes and accompanies the military conflict demonstrates the sophisticated use of public opinion and cultural prejudices in ancient political competition, as both sides deploy rhetoric, symbols, and selective presentation of facts to mobilize support and undermine their opponent's legitimacy. Octavian's campaigns against Antony focus heavily on the alleged corrupting influence of Cleopatra and Eastern values, while Antony's supporters emphasize his military achievements and his success in bringing Eastern wealth and resources into alliance with Roman power. The defection of key supporters from Antony to Octavian during 32-31 BCE reflects not just opportunistic calculation, but genuine concerns about the direction that Antony's policies are taking and their implications for Roman traditions and institutions. Many Romans who had initially supported Antony because of his connection to Caesar and his military reputation become increasingly uncomfortable with his relationship with Cleopatra and his apparent willingness to compromise Roman supremacy in exchange for Eastern support and resources. Cleopatra's role in the developing crisis requires her to balance her personal loyalty to Antony with her responsibilities to Egypt and her dynasty, as she recognizes that their partnership's success or failure will determine not only their personal fates but the future of her kingdom and possibly the survival of Hellenistic civilization throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Her decision to support Antony militarily and financially represents an enormous gamble that commits Egypt's resources to a conflict whose outcome will determine whether she rules as an independent queen or faces execution as a defeated enemy. The naval preparations that both sides undertake during 32 BCE transform the Eastern Mediterranean into an armed camp, as fleets gather resources and allies compete for strategic positions that will prove crucial in the coming conflict. Egypt's naval tradition and shipbuilding capabilities give Antony and Cleopatra significant advantages in the kind of maritime warfare that seems likely to determine the outcome of their struggle with Octavian. But these advantages depend on maintaining unity of command and strategic purpose that proves increasingly difficult to achieve as political pressures mount. The stage is set for the final confrontation that will determine not only the personal fates of the protagonists, but the future organization of the ancient world, as two different visions of Roman imperial development prepare to test their validity in the ultimate arena of military conflict and political struggle. The Battle of Actium, the year 31 BCE, opens with the Mediterranean world poised on the brink of a naval confrontation that will determine not only the personal fates of Octavian, Antony, and Cleopatra, but the future character of Roman civilization and the survival of the last independent Hellenistic kingdom. The fleets that gather in the waters off western Greece represent more than military forces. They embody competing visions of imperial organization, cultural identity, and political legitimacy that have been building toward this moment of decision throughout the decade of triumviral rule. The battle that erupts on September 2nd, 31 BCE, near the promontory of Actium, will be remembered not just as a military engagement, but as the pivotal moment when the ancient world transitions from the chaos of civil war to the stability of imperial rule under a single supreme authority. The strategic situation that develops during the months preceding the battle demonstrates the sophisticated military and political planning that characterizes warfare at the highest levels of ancient statecraft, as both sides maneuver for advantages that extend far beyond simple tactical positioning. Octavian's forces, commanded by his brilliant admiral Marcus Agrippa, establish a blockade of the Ambracian Gulf that traps Antony's fleet while simultaneously cutting off his army's supply lines and communication routes with the eastern territories that form the foundation of his power. This strategy reflects not just military skill, but political understanding of the psychological factors that influence the loyalty of allies and the morale of troops facing extended periods of uncertainty and hardship. Antony and Cleopatra's response to this blockade reveals both the strengths and weaknesses of their partnership as they struggle to coordinate naval and land operations while managing the complex politics of their diverse coalition of Roman veterans, Egyptian forces, and Eastern allies whose commitment to their cause varies based on constantly changing assessments of likely victory or defeat. Cleopatra's presence with the fleet provides tangible evidence of Egypt's commitment to the alliance, while also giving her direct influence over strategic decisions, but it also creates political vulnerabilities that Octavian's propaganda exploits, effectively by portraying Antony as a Roman general subordinated to foreign feminine authority. The composition of the opposing forces reflects the broader cultural and political divisions that have driven the Roman world toward civil war. As Octavian's fleet represents primarily Italian and Western Mediterranean resources, while Antony's coalition draws its strength from the wealthy eastern provinces and their accumulated naval traditions. The ships themselves embody these differences. Octavian's vessels are smaller, more maneuverable craft, designed for the kind of ramming tactics that Roman naval warfare has traditionally emphasized, while Antony's fleet includes massive Egyptian and Eastern vessels that serve as floating fortresses capable of carrying large numbers of marines and missile troops, but potentially vulnerable to the speed and agility of their opponents. The months of stalemate that precede the actual battle create psychological pressures that prove as important as military factors in determining the eventual outcome, as both sides face the corrosive effects of prolonged uncertainty, resource depletion, and the constant need to maintain morale among forces that have been prepared for decisive action, but find themselves locked in a war of attrition that favors neither side's strategic preferences. Disease spreads through both camps, supplies become increasingly difficult to obtain, and the political reliability of key commanders becomes subject to constant questioning and surveillance. Cleopatra's role during this period demonstrates both her military capabilities and the political constraints that limit her influence over strategic decisions that will determine her kingdom's fate. Her knowledge of naval warfare, gained through years of defending Egypt's Red Sea trade routes and Mediterranean commercial interests, provides valuable expertise that influences tactical planning, while her personal wealth continues to finance. operations that might otherwise collapse due to resource shortages. But her position as a foreign queen allied with Roman forces creates constant tensions that require careful management to prevent defections or open rebellion among troops whose loyalty to Antony does not necessarily extend to his Egyptian partner. Here's something that I think resonates across different cultures and historical periods. The challenge that Cleopatra faces at Actium shows how female leaders throughout history have had to prove their competence in traditionally male domains like military strategy, while also dealing with cultural prejudices that question their legitimacy. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably seen modern examples of women in leadership positions facing similar challenges. What do you think are the unique obstacles that female leaders encounter in crisis situations? How do you think gender expectations affect the way leaders are perceived and the strategies they can successfully employ? Share your thoughts in the comments. The decision to fight at Actium, rather than withdraw to Egypt or attempt to break out toward the eastern provinces, represents a calculated gamble that reflects both sides' assessment of their strategic options and political necessities, as continued stalemate threatens to erode support more rapidly than decisive action, even if that action involves significant risks of catastrophic defeat. Antony and Cleopatra recognize that their coalition's unity depends on demonstrating ability to achieve military success against Octavian's forces, while also understanding that retreat would be interpreted as admission of defeat that could trigger widespread defections among allies whose commitment has already been tested by months of inconclusive maneuvering. The actual battle unfolds in phases that reveal both the tactical sophistication of ancient naval warfare and the crucial importance of command decisions made under the extreme pressure of combat that will determine the fate of empires. The initial engagement follows conventional patterns as both fleets deploy in traditional line formations designed to maximize their respective advantages in ramming power versus missile capacity. But the battle's character changes dramatically when Cleopatra's squadron breaks away from the main engagement and heads toward open water, followed shortly by Antony himself, in what appears to be either a prearranged tactical maneuver or a spontaneous decision to escape encirclement. The controversy that has surrounded Cleopatra's withdrawal from the battle for over 2,000 years reflects the difficulty of reconstructing ancient military events from sources that often reflect political propaganda rather than objective military analysis, while also revealing the gendered nature of much historical commentary that portrays her actions as evidence of feminine weakness or oriental treachery rather than rational strategic calculation. Modern military historians increasingly recognize that her decision to preserve the Egyptian fleet may have represented sound tactical judgment in a situation where continued fighting promised only destruction without meaningful possibility of victory. Antony's decision to follow Cleopatra rather than remain with his fleet creates the perception of abandonment that destroys the morale of his remaining forces and transforms what might have been a tactical withdrawal into a decisive defeat. That eliminates his credibility as a Roman leader and guarantees Octavian's victory in their struggle for supremacy. Whether this decision reflects personal loyalty, strategic calculation, or simple panic under pressure remains debatable, but its consequences prove catastrophic for both his immediate military position and his long-term political prospects. The collapse of Antony's fleet following his departure demonstrates how ancient military formations depended on the visible presence of commanding officers to maintain unit cohesion and fighting effectiveness, as individual ship captains, facing apparently hopeless odds, choose surrender or flight rather than continued resistance that can serve no strategic purpose. The speed with which disciplined naval forces can disintegrate once their command structure breaks down provides a sobering illustration of the psychological factors that often prove more decisive than purely material considerations in determining military outcomes. The aftermath of Actium sees Octavian transformed overnight from civil war leader to master of the Roman world, his victory providing both the military credibility and the financial resources necessary to consolidate power and begin the process of institutional reform that will transform the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. His clemency toward most of Antony's defeated supporters reflects not magnanimity, but political calculation, as he recognizes that successful imperial rule requires integrating former enemies rather than creating permanent opposition through excessive vengeance and punishment. For Antony and Cleopatra, the defeat at Actium eliminates their last hope of maintaining an independent power base capable of challenging Octavian's authority, forcing them into a desperate retreat to Egypt where they must prepare for siege, negotiate for terms, or plan for the kind of dramatic final gesture that might preserve their dignity even if it cannot save their lives. The strategic options available to them have been drastically reduced, while Octavian's victory provides him with momentum and resources that make eventual conquest of Egypt almost inevitable unless unforeseen circumstances intervene to change the balance of forces. The Battle of Actium thus represents not just a military engagement, but a turning point in ancient history that marks the end of the Hellenistic Age and the beginning of the Roman Empire. The defeat of the last independent challenge to Roman supremacy and the consolidation of Mediterranean civilization under the authority of a single supreme ruler whose decisions will shape the development of Western civilization for centuries to come. The final acts. The months following Actium witness the gradual collapse of everything that Antony and Cleopatra have spent decades building, as their defeat in battle unleashes a cascade of defections, betrayals, and political realignments that strip away their remaining sources of support and leave them isolated in Alexandria, while Octavian methodically consolidates his victory and prepares for the final campaign that will eliminate them as threats to his supreme authority. The psychological toll of their situation becomes as devastating as their military losses, as two rulers accustomed to commanding respect and wielding power across the Mediterranean world find themselves reduced to desperate expedients and, increasingly, frantic attempts to salvage something from the wreckage of their ambitions. Antony's behavior during this period reveals the profound impact that defeat and isolation have on a man whose entire identity has been built around military success and political leadership. As he oscillates between periods of determined activity and episodes of despair that suggest the beginning of psychological collapse under pressures that exceed his capacity for effective response. His attempts to rally support among remaining loyal forces demonstrate both his continued charisma and the futility of resistance when faced with Octavian's overwhelming advantages in resources, popular support, and strategic position. The Roman general, who had once commanded legions from Gaul to Parthia, finds himself struggling to maintain authority over a shrinking circle of supporters whose loyalty can no longer be sustained by promises of future victories or rewards. Cleopatra's response to their deteriorating situation demonstrates the same intelligence and resilience that have characterized her entire reign, as she recognizes that military resistance offers no hope of success while diplomatic negotiation might preserve something of value for her kingdom and her children, even if it cannot save her own life or throne. Her secret communications with Octavian during the winter of 31 to 30 BCE reflect not betrayal of Antony, but practical recognition that Egypt's survival may depend on accommodation with the victor rather than joint destruction with the defeated. The complexity of her position, as both Antony's partner and Egypt's queen, requires her to balance personal loyalty against dynastic responsibility in ways that create impossible choices, regardless of which course she ultimately pursues. The suicide attempts and theatrical gestures that occupy both leaders during this period reveal their struggle to find meaning and dignity in a situation that offers neither military victory nor honorable compromise, as they explore various forms of dramatic death that might preserve their reputations while eliminating the humiliation of capture and public exhibition in Octavian's triumph. These plans range from poison to snakebite to gladiatorial combat, each reflecting different aspects of their personalities and cultural backgrounds, while also demonstrating their awareness that how they die may prove more important for their historical legacy than how they have lived. The arrival of Octavian's forces in Egypt during the summer of 30 BCE creates the final crisis that will determine not only the personal fates of Antony and Cleopatra, but the future status of Egypt within the Roman Empire and the survival of Ptolemaic civilization after 3 centuries of Hellenistic rule. Octavian's strategy combines military pressure with psychological warfare designed to isolate Antony and Cleopatra from their remaining supporters while demonstrating the futility of continued resistance and the advantages that cooperation might provide for those willing to accept the new political reality he represents. The defection of Antony's remaining military commanders, including men who had served him loyally for decades, reflects not just opportunistic calculation, but genuine recognition that continued resistance serves no strategic purpose and can only result in unnecessary casualties among troops whose lives might be preserved through timely submission to superior force. These betrayals devastate Antony personally, while also eliminating his last hope of mounting effective military opposition to Octavian's conquest of Egypt. Here's something that I find both tragic and relevant to leadership challenges throughout history. The way that Antony and Cleopatra handle their final crisis shows how even the most capable leaders can be overwhelmed when they face impossible situations with no good options. From which country are you watching this? Because leaders throughout history have faced moments where all their choices lead to disaster, where loyalty conflicts with survival, and where personal dignity must be weighed against practical necessities. What do you think determines how people behave in these ultimate test situations? How do you think leaders should balance their personal honor against their responsibilities to the people who depend on them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The final confrontation between Antony and Octavian takes place not in epic battle, but in a series of negotiations, ultimatums, and psychological maneuvers that reflect the political sophistication of both men, while also revealing the extent to which Antony's position has deteriorated beyond any possibility of military recovery. Octavian's offers of conditional clemency create opportunities for surrender that might preserve Antony's life while eliminating him as a political threat. But these proposals require acknowledgement of subordinate status that Antony finds psychologically impossible to accept despite the rational arguments for accommodation. The false report of Cleopatra's death that reaches Antony in his final hours creates the emotional crisis that pushes him beyond calculation toward the kind of dramatic gesture that ancient culture respected even when it deplored its practical consequences. His decision to fall on his sword represents not just personal despair, but adherence to Roman ideals of honorable death that preserve dignity even when they cannot preserve life, demonstrating that his essential identity as a Roman nobleman survives. The political compromises and personal entanglements that have marked his final years. Cleopatra's discovery of Antony's dying body and her final conversation with her mortally wounded lover create one of the most emotionally powerful scenes in ancient history, as two people who have dominated Mediterranean politics for decades confront the failure of all their ambitions while trying to find meaning in their partnership despite its catastrophic consequences. Their final moments together combine personal tenderness with political tragedy, individual loss with historical transformation, private grief with public catastrophe in ways that demonstrate how personal relationships become intertwined with historical forces larger than any individual can control or direct. The negotiations between Cleopatra and Octavian following Antony's death reveal both her continued political intelligence and the fundamental impossibility of preserving Egyptian independence under circumstances that have eliminated every source of leverage she might have used to secure reasonable terms. Octavian needs her cooperation to ensure peaceful transfer of authority and to prevent destruction of Egypt's wealth through scorched earth tactics or popular rebellion. But he cannot allow her to survive as a potential focal point for future opposition to Roman rule, or as a symbol of alternatives to the imperial system he is creating. Cleopatra's final preparations demonstrate the same attention to symbolic detail and cultural significance that have characterized her entire career, as she stages her death in ways designed to emphasize her status as the legitimate pharaoh of Egypt and the last representative of a civilization that has contributed immeasurably to human knowledge and achievement. Her choice of suicide by speed bite connects her death to ancient Egyptian religious symbolism, while also creating the kind of dramatic narrative that will influence how her story is remembered and retold for thousands of years. The discovery of Cleopatra's body, dressed in royal regalia and surrounded by the trappings of pharaonic authority, provides Octavian with both relief at the elimination of his last significant opponent and recognition that her death marks the end of an era in Mediterranean civilization that can never be restored or replicated. Her suicide eliminates the practical problems that her survival would have created, while also depriving him of the triumph that public exhibition of captured enemies traditionally provided to victorious Roman generals. The execution of Caesarion, Caesar's alleged son by Cleopatra, demonstrates the ruthless efficiency with which Octavian eliminates potential challenges to his authority, while also revealing the way that political necessities can override personal sentiments and cultural traditions that might otherwise protect innocent individuals from the consequences of their parents' political choices. The boy's death eliminates the possibility that Caesar's alleged heir might someday challenge Octavian's own claims to legitimacy, while also preventing the kind of dynastic complications that could destabilize the imperial system he is constructing. Though preservation of Cleopatra's other children, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, reflects both Octavian's political calculation and his recognition that excessive vengeance might create martyrs whose memory could inspire future opposition to Roman rule. Their survival in Roman custody provides evidence of his clemency, while also ensuring that they cannot become focal points for Egyptian nationalism or Hellenistic restoration movements. The transformation of Egypt from independent kingdom to Roman province eliminates the last major source of opposition to Roman hegemony, while also providing the imperial system with resources and administrative expertise that will prove crucial for the success of Augustus's reforms and the stability of the early empire. But this transformation also marks the end of 3,000 years of pharaonic rule and the absorption of one of humanity's oldest and most sophisticated civilizations into the Roman imperial system. The death of Cleopatra thus represents not just personal tragedy but historical transformation on the largest possible scale. As the Mediterranean world transitions from the multicultural complexity of the Hellenistic age to the unified authority of Roman imperial rule that will shape Western civilization for the next 5 centuries and influence human development in ways that persist to the present day. The legacy of the last pharaoh, the death of Cleopatra VII in 30 BCE, marks not merely the end of one woman's extraordinary life, but the conclusion of the Ptolemaic dynasty's 3-century rule over Egypt and the final absorption of the last great independent kingdom into the Roman Empire, transforming the Mediterranean from a collection of competing civilizations into a unified political and cultural system under imperial Roman authority. Yet paradoxically, Cleopatra's defeat and death secure her a form of immortality that military victory could never have provided, as her story becomes embedded in the cultural memory of humanity in ways that transcend the specific historical circumstances of her time and speak to universal themes of love, power, ambition, and tragedy that resonate across all subsequent ages and civilizations. The immediate consequences of Egypt's incorporation into the Roman Empire demonstrate both the efficiency of Roman administrative systems and the profound changes that imperial rule brings to societies that had maintained their independence for millennia. Octavian, now styling himself Augustus, treats Egypt not as an ordinary province, but as his personal possession, appointing prefects who answer directly to him rather than to the Roman Senate, and establishing policies designed to maximize the extraction of wealth while preventing the kind of local autonomy that might encourage future independence movements or provide resources for potential rivals to his supreme authority. The systematic exploitation of Egypt's agricultural wealth transforms the kingdom that had once been Cleopatra's independent realm into the granary of the Roman Empire, as the Nile's annual floods now serve not Egyptian prosperity, but the feeding of Rome's urban population and the financing of imperial military campaigns and public works projects throughout the Mediterranean world. The irony is profound. Egypt's wealth, which Cleopatra had hoped to use to preserve her kingdom's independence and maintain her dynasty's power, instead becomes one of the primary sources of strength for the imperial system that has destroyed everything she fought to protect. The cultural transformation that follows Roman conquest proves even more dramatic than the political changes, as the sophisticated synthesis of Greek, Egyptian, and Near Eastern traditions that had flourished under Ptolemaic rule gives way to a more uniform Roman imperial culture that values practical administration over intellectual innovation and political stability over cultural diversity. The Great Library of Alexandria, once the center of Mediterranean intellectual life, gradually loses its preeminence as Roman educational institutions in the capital and other Western cities attract the empire's most talented scholars and receive the bulk of imperial patronage for research and scholarship. Yet the process of cultural change proves more complex than simple Roman dominance over Egyptian traditions, as the conquest of Egypt also transforms Roman civilization itself in ways that influence imperial development for centuries to come. The wealth, administrative expertise, and cultural sophistication that Rome gains through Egyptian conquest provide essential resources for the transformation of the Roman Republic into an effective imperial system, while exposure to Egyptian art, architecture, and religious practices influences Roman culture in directions that make the imperial system more appealing to Eastern subjects and more capable of governing diverse populations with different cultural backgrounds. The religious syncretism that develops throughout the Roman Empire during the 1st century CE draws heavily on Egyptian spiritual traditions that had been preserved and transmitted through Cleopatra's court and the institutions she had patronized. As the worship of Isis and other Egyptian deities spreads throughout Roman territories and influences the development of new religious movements that will ultimately transform the spiritual landscape of the ancient world. In this sense, Cleopatra's cultural program achieves a form of victory even in political defeat, as Egyptian civilization continues to influence Mediterranean development long after its political independence has ended. The historical memory of Cleopatra herself becomes the subject of intense manipulation and reinterpretation by successive Roman authors and imperial propagandists who need to justify Augustus's rise to power while also explaining the attraction that the Egyptian queen had held for two of Rome's greatest leaders. The portrait that emerges from Roman sources like Plutarch and Dio Cassius emphasizes her beauty and sexual allure while downplaying her intelligence, administrative competence, and cultural achievements, creating a caricature that serves Roman political needs but obscures the historical reality of one of the ancient world's most capable rulers. This process of historical distortion serves multiple purposes for Roman imperial ideology, as it allows Augustus and his successors to portray their conquest of Egypt as a victory over feminine weakness and Oriental excess, rather than the defeat of a sophisticated opponent who had nearly succeeded in creating an alternative model for Mediterranean political organization. The emphasis on Cleopatra's alleged moral failings and cultural otherness helps justify Roman rule, while also providing cautionary tales about the dangers of allowing foreign influence to corrupt Roman virtue and Republican tradition. Here's something that I think applies to how history gets written and rewritten throughout time and across cultures. The way Cleopatra's story has been shaped by the political needs of different eras shows how powerful interests can influence the way we remember and understand historical figures. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably seen examples of how national narratives emphasize certain aspects of historical events while downplaying others. What do you think are the dangers when political considerations override historical accuracy? How can we distinguish between reliable historical evidence and propaganda designed to serve contemporary political purposes? Share your thoughts in the comments. The rediscovery of Cleopatra's story during the Renaissance and its subsequent reinterpretation by Enlightenment historians, Romantic poets, and modern scholars demonstrates how each age finds in her biography reflections of its own concerns and values, creating multiple versions of her story that serve different cultural and ideological purposes, while often bearing little resemblance to the historical reality of her life and reign. Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra emphasizes the tragic consequences of passion-overwhelming political judgment, while 19th-century Orientalist literature focuses on her alleged sexual excess and cultural otherness in ways that reflect European colonial attitudes toward Eastern civilizations. Modern archaeological discoveries and scholarly research have gradually restored a more accurate understanding of Cleopatra's achievements and the sophistication of Ptolemaic Egyptian civilization, revealing her as one of the ancient world's most educated and capable rulers rather than the seductress of popular imagination. Evidence from Egyptian papyri, inscriptions, and artistic remains demonstrates her mastery of multiple languages, her personal involvement in legal and administrative decisions, her patronage of scientific research and cultural projects, and her sophisticated understanding of international politics and economic policy. The feminist scholarship of the late 20th and early 21st centuries has provided particularly valuable insights into the ways that gender bias has distorted historical understanding of Cleopatra's reign and achievements, revealing how ancient sources influenced by Roman political propaganda have been perpetuated by modern historians who failed to question assumptions about female leadership and political capability. This revisionist work demonstrates how the real Cleopatra was far more interesting and historically significant than the legendary figure created by centuries of masculine interpretation and cultural stereotype. The economic impact of Cleopatra's policies and the administrative systems she developed continue to influence discussions of development economics and political organization in diverse societies. As modern scholars recognize that her approaches to managing cultural diversity, integrating different economic systems, and maintaining political legitimacy across diverse populations offer insights that remain relevant for contemporary leaders facing similar challenges. Her success in maintaining Egyptian prosperity and cultural distinctiveness while navigating the complex requirements of Roman alliance provides case studies that inform current debates about globalization, cultural preservation, and political autonomy. The artistic and literary legacy that Cleopatra's story has generated spans nearly every form of creative expression and includes some of the finest achievements in Western culture, from ancient Roman poetry through Renaissance drama to modern opera, film, and literature. Each artistic interpretation reflects not only its creator's vision, but also the cultural concerns and aesthetic preferences of its historical moment, creating an accumulated tradition that demonstrates how certain historical figures transcend their original contexts to become permanent parts of human cultural heritage. The archaeological work that continues at Alexandria and other sites associated with Cleopatra's reign provides ongoing opportunities for new discoveries that may further revise our understanding of her achievements and the civilization she represented. As underwater exploration of the ancient harbor reveals palace complexes and public buildings that demonstrate the sophistication of Ptolemaic architecture and urban planning, while excavations at other Egyptian sites uncover evidence of the administrative and economic systems that sustained her kingdom throughout its final centuries. The continuing fascination with Cleopatra's story in popular culture demonstrates the enduring appeal of her biography as both historical narrative and universal human drama, as audiences in every age recognize in her struggles themes that speak to their own experiences of love, ambition, political competition, cultural conflict, and the tragic gap between human aspirations and the limitations imposed by historical circumstances beyond individual control. Her story combines the specific details of ancient Mediterranean politics with universal themes that make it perpetually relevant to new audiences discovering it for the first time. The debates that continue among historians about various aspects of Cleopatra's reign, her relationship with Julius Caesar, her political motivations, her administrative achievements, her military capabilities, and her final months demonstrate both the limitations of ancient source material and the ongoing vitality of historical scholarship as new methodologies and perspectives generate fresh insights into familiar material. These scholarly discussions contribute not only to our understanding of the ancient world, but also to broader questions about leadership, cultural interaction, and political adaptation that remain relevant for contemporary global civilization. The symbolic power that Cleopatra's image continues to hold in discussions of female leadership, East-West cultural relations, and the relationship between personal life and political responsibility demonstrates how historical figures can transcend their original contexts to become archetypal representations of universal human experiences and challenges. Her story serves as both inspiration and cautionary tale, showing how individual excellence can achieve remarkable results, while also revealing the ways that larger historical forces can overwhelm even the most capable leaders when circumstances become impossible to manage or control. The ultimate legacy of Cleopatra VII lies not in the political kingdom she failed to preserve, but in the cultural impact she continues to have on human imagination and historical understanding more than 2,000 years after her death, proving that certain individuals achieve, through the power of their stories, the kind of immortality that no military victory or political success can guarantee. She remains one of history's most compelling figures because her life encompasses both the heights of human achievement and the depths of tragic failure, both the possibilities and limitations of individual agency when confronted with the sweep of historical change. The transformation of Egypt. The transformation of Egypt from independent kingdom to Roman province under Augustus represents one of history's most dramatic examples of how conquest can reshape not only political institutions, but the fundamental character of civilizations that have maintained their distinctive identities for thousands of years. The administrative system that Augustus establishes for governing Egypt reveals both the sophistication of Roman imperial organization and the recognition that this particular conquest requires special treatment due to the kingdom's strategic importance. Enormous wealth and complex cultural traditions that differ significantly from those of other territories absorbed into the expanding Roman Empire. Augustus's decision to treat Egypt as his personal domain rather than a normal senatorial province reflects both practical considerations about resource control and political calculations about potential threats to imperial stability. As the kingdom's grain production provides food for Rome's urban population, while its gold mines and luxury trade generate revenues that help finance the military forces and public works projects necessary to maintain imperial authority throughout the Mediterranean world. By keeping Egypt under direct imperial control, Augustus ensures that no potential rival can gain access to resources that might support challenges to his supreme authority, while also preventing the kind of provincial corruption and mismanagement that had characterized late Republican administration in other eastern territories. The Roman prefects who govern Egypt on Augustus's behalf face challenges that require them to balance efficient extraction of resources with maintenance of social stability among a population that includes native Egyptians with centuries-old cultural traditions, Greek residents whose Ancestors had ruled the kingdom for 300 years, Jewish communities with their own religious and legal practices, and growing numbers of Roman settlers and administrators whose presence gradually alters the kingdom's demographic composition and cultural character. The legal and administrative framework that develops in Roman Egypt demonstrates both continuity, with Ptolemaic practices and adaptation to Roman imperial requirements, as the new rulers recognize that effective governance requires accommodation to local conditions, while also ensuring that imperial objectives are achieved efficiently and completely. The complex system of taxation that emerges combines Roman fiscal techniques with Egyptian agricultural knowledge to create mechanisms for extracting wealth that prove remarkably durable and effective throughout the imperial period. The cultural policies pursued by successive Roman administrators reveal the complex relationship between imperial control and local tradition that characterizes much of Roman provincial administration, as the conquerors seek to maintain social stability and administrative efficiency, while gradually transforming conquered societies in directions that serve imperial interests and reflect Roman values. The decline of Alexandria's intellectual preeminence occurs gradually as Roman educational and cultural institutions in other cities attract scholars and artists who might previously have sought Egyptian patronage, while the Great Library loses much of its collection and influence as imperial priorities focus on practical administration rather than theoretical research. Yet the process of Romanization in Egypt proves more complex and bidirectional than simple. Cultural domination, as Egyptian religious practices, artistic styles, and intellectual traditions continue to influence Roman civilization long after political conquest has ended Egyptian independence. The worship of Isis spreads throughout Roman territories during the imperial period, while Egyptian architectural and artistic motifs appear in Roman buildings and decorative arts from Britain to Mesopotamia, demonstrating the continuing vitality and appeal of Egyptian cultural achievements, even under foreign political control. The economic transformation of Egypt under Roman rule demonstrates both the efficiency of imperial resource extraction and the long-term costs that systematic exploitation imposes on conquered societies, as agricultural production becomes increasingly focused on export crops destined for Roman markets, while local consumption and investment decline relative to the kingdom's overall productive capacity. The irrigation systems and agricultural techniques that had sustained Egyptian prosperity for millennia continue to function effectively under Roman administration, but their benefits flow increasingly to imperial rather than local purposes. The social changes that occur in Roman Egypt reflect broader patterns of cultural integration and demographic mixing that characterize the Roman Empire throughout its territorial expansion, as intermarriage, economic mobility, and educational opportunity create new social categories that transcend traditional ethnic and cultural boundaries, while also generating tensions between assimilated elites and populations that maintain stronger connections to pre-conquest traditions and identities. Here's something that I think applies to discussions of cultural change and globalization in any era. The way Egypt adapts to Roman rule shows how conquering powers often adopt elements from the cultures they dominate, even while imposing their own political and economic systems. From which country are you watching this? Because processes of cultural exchange and adaptation continue to shape our world today as different civilizations interact through trade, migration, and political integration. What do you think determines which cultural elements survive when different societies come into contact? How do you think we can preserve valuable cultural traditions while still adapting to changing circumstances? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The religious developments that occur in Roman Egypt provide particularly clear examples of the complex cultural interactions that characterize imperial rule, as traditional Egyptian spiritual practices blend with Greek philosophical concepts and Roman legal frameworks to create new forms of religious expression that influence the development of Christianity and other movements that will eventually transform the spiritual landscape of the ancient world. The continuing veneration of ancient Egyptian deities alongside newly introduced Roman gods creates a religious environment that reflects the cultural complexity of imperial society, while also preparing the ground for the monotheistic religions that will eventually dominate Mediterranean civilization. The architectural projects undertaken in Roman Egypt demonstrate both imperial wealth and the continuing importance of Egyptian symbolic and aesthetic traditions in legitimizing political authority, as successive emperors sponsor building projects that combine Roman engineering techniques with Egyptian decorative motifs to create structures that appeal to diverse populations while also asserting imperial power and cultural sophistication. The temples and public buildings constructed during this period reveal how imperial propaganda can incorporate local traditions while still serving the political purposes of foreign rulers. The literary and historical works produced in Roman Egypt contribute to the preservation and transmission of Egyptian cultural memory, while also reflecting the influence of Roman educational systems and cultural values on local intellectual life. As writers like Manetho and Appian work to record and interpret Egyptian history for audiences that include both native populations seeking to maintain cultural continuity and foreign readers interested in understanding the civilizations that Rome has conquered and absorbed. The gradual decline of hieroglyphic writing and traditional Egyptian religious practices under Roman rule represents one of history's most dramatic examples of how political conquest can lead to the loss of cultural knowledge and spiritual traditions that had been maintained for thousands of years. As the practical advantages of learning Greek and Latin for advancement in imperial society make traditional Egyptian education less attractive to ambitious individuals and families seeking economic and social mobility. The persistence of Egyptian cultural elements in Roman art, architecture, and religious practice throughout the imperial period demonstrates that conquest does not necessarily mean complete cultural obliteration, as conquered civilizations can continue to influence their conquerors even after losing political independence and demographic dominance. The obelisks that Roman emperors transport to Rome and other imperial cities serve as permanent reminders of Egyptian achievement, while also symbolizing Roman power over ancient civilizations. The economic integration of Egypt into the Roman Empire's commercial networks creates new opportunities for trade and cultural exchange, while also making the former kingdom increasingly dependent on imperial economic policies and market conditions that are determined by factors beyond local control, demonstrating how political conquest can transform independent economies into peripheral components of larger systems that may not serve local interests or development needs. The administrative experience that Roman officials gain through governing Egypt provides valuable knowledge about managing culturally diverse populations and complex economic systems that influences imperial policy throughout the Mediterranean world, as techniques developed for Egyptian administration are adapted for use in other provinces with similar challenges and opportunities for resource extraction and cultural integration. The memory of Cleopatra's reign and the Ptolemaic kingdoms' achievements continues to influence Egyptian cultural identity throughout the Roman period, providing both inspiration for resistance to foreign rule and models for accommodation with imperial authority that allow local traditions to survive within the framework of Roman political control, demonstrating how historical memory can serve multiple political purposes depending on circumstances and the interpretive frameworks applied by different groups within conquered societies. The transformation of Egypt thus represents both the end of one of history's great independent civilizations and the beginning of new forms of cultural synthesis and political organization that will influence Mediterranean development for centuries to come. As Roman imperial rule creates conditions for interaction between different cultural traditions that generate innovations in religion, art, philosophy, and social organization that might not have emerged under conditions of continued political fragmentation and military competition. The eternal queen more than 2,000 years after her death, Cleopatra VII remains one of history's most compelling and controversial figures. her story having transcended the specific circumstances of ancient Mediterranean politics to become a universal narrative about power, love, ambition, and the tragic consequences that can result when individual excellence confronts historical forces, too powerful to be controlled or redirected by any single person, regardless of their intelligence, resources, or determination. The continuing fascination with her biography reflects not only the dramatic nature of her rise and fall, but also the way her life illuminates eternal themes about leadership, cultural identity, and the relationship between personal desires and political responsibilities that remain relevant to every age and society. The process by which Cleopatra's historical reputation has been shaped over the centuries demonstrates how powerful interests can manipulate collective memory to serve contemporary political and cultural purposes, creating multiple versions of her story that often reveal more about the societies that produced them than about the ancient queen herself. Roman historians and poets, writing under imperial patronage and influenced by the need to justify Augustus's rise to power, emphasized her alleged moral failings and foreign otherness while downplaying her intelligence, administrative competence, and cultural achievements, establishing patterns of interpretation that influenced Western understanding of her reign for nearly 2 millennia. Medieval Christian writers, working within religious frameworks that viewed pagan antiquity with suspicion and disapproval, portrayed Cleopatra as an example of the spiritual corruption and moral decay that they believed characterized pre-Christian civilization, emphasizing her relationships with Caesar and Antony as evidence of the sexual license and political instability that supposedly dominated ancient societies before the triumph of Christian virtue and biblical morality. These interpretations served both theological purposes and contemporary political needs, as medieval rulers and religious authorities used ancient examples to support arguments about proper governance and social organization. The Renaissance rediscovery of classical literature and the renewed interest in ancient history that characterized early modern European culture created new opportunities for reinterpreting Cleopatra's story. As humanist scholars and artists found in her biography themes that spoke to their own concerns about political authority, cultural achievement, and the relationship between classical antiquity and contemporary civilization. The artistic masterpieces produced during this period, including Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, demonstrate both the continuing appeal of her story and the way that each age reimagines historical figures to address its own questions and concerns. The colonial period of European expansion created additional layers of interpretation as Western writers and scholars used Cleopatra's story to explore themes about East-West cultural relations, the alleged superiority of Western civilization, and the supposed consequences of allowing Eastern influence to corrupt Western political and moral systems. These Orientalist readings reflected contemporary European attitudes toward Asian and African societies, while also serving to justify imperial expansion and cultural domination by portraying Western conquest as necessary correctives to Eastern decadence and political instability. The feminist scholarship of the 20th and 21st centuries has provided crucial correctives to centuries of male-dominated interpretation, revealing how gender bias has distorted understanding of Cleopatra's achievements, while also demonstrating the sophisticated political intelligence and administrative competence that made her one of the ancient world's most effective rulers. This revisionist work has restored appreciation for her linguistic abilities, cultural patronage, economic policies, and diplomatic skills, while also showing how her relationships with Caesar and Antony represented strategic political alliances, rather than simple romantic entanglements. Modern archaeological research has contributed additional evidence for reassessing Cleopatra's reign and achievements, as excavations at Alexandria and other Egyptian sites reveal the sophistication of Ptolemaic administration, the effectiveness of Egyptian economic systems, and the cultural achievements that flourished under her patronage. The underwater exploration of Alexandria's ancient harbor has uncovered palace complexes and public buildings that demonstrate the architectural sophistication and urban planning that characterized her capital, while papyrus documents provide insights into the legal and administrative systems that sustained her kingdom throughout its final decades. The continuing production of artistic works inspired by Cleopatra's story, including novels, films, operas, and theatrical productions, demonstrates both the enduring appeal of her biography and the way that contemporary artists find in her life themes that speak to current concerns about female leadership, cultural diversity, international relations, and the challenges of governing in complex political environments. Each new interpretation adds layers of meaning while also reflecting the cultural values and aesthetic preferences of its creators and audiences. Here's something that I find fascinating about how historical figures become cultural icons. Cleopatra's story continues to evolve and adapt to new circumstances because it contains universal themes that speak to human experiences across different cultures and time periods. From whichever country you're watching this, you probably have historical figures from your own culture who have undergone similar processes of reinterpretation and myth-making. What do you think determines which historical figures achieve this kind of lasting cultural impact? How do you think we should balance respect for historical accuracy with the creative freedom that artists need to make ancient stories relevant to contemporary audiences? Share your thoughts in the comments. The academic debates that continue among historians about various aspects of Cleopatra's reign demonstrate both the limitations of ancient source material and the ongoing vitality of historical scholarship, as new methodologies and theoretical approaches generate fresh insights into familiar evidence, while also raising new questions about the relationship between political power and cultural authority in the ancient world. These scholarly discussions contribute not only to our understanding of Ptolemaic Egypt and Roman imperial expansion, but also to broader questions about leadership, gender, cultural interaction, and political adaptation that remain relevant for contemporary global civilization. The symbolic power that Cleopatra's image holds in contemporary discussions of female political leadership demonstrates how historical figures can transcend their original contexts to become archetypal representations of universal human experiences and challenges, as her story provides both inspiration for women seeking political authority and cautionary lessons about the obstacles that female leaders continue to face in societies that remain influenced by traditional gender expectations and cultural stereotypes. The educational value of studying Cleopatra's reign extends beyond simple historical knowledge to encompass broader lessons about the complexity of political decision-making, the importance of cultural competence in international relations, the challenges of managing diverse populations with different traditions and expectations, and the tragic consequences that can result when individual excellence confronts historical circumstances that exceed any person's capacity to control or redirect. The moral and philosophical questions raised by Cleopatra's story about the relationship between personal loyalty and political responsibility, the justification for using deception and manipulation in pursuit of worthy goals, the price of political survival in hostile environments, and the tragic nature of choices between competing values, continue to challenge audiences and provide material for ethical reflection and debate that remains relevant to contemporary political and personal decision-making. The cultural legacy that Cleopatra has bequeathed to human civilization through her patronage of learning, her support for cultural synthesis between different traditions, and her demonstration of the possibilities and limitations of female political authority provides inspiration and guidance for contemporary leaders facing similar challenges in managing cultural diversity, promoting international cooperation, and advancing human knowledge and achievement. The technological capabilities that now allow for more sophisticated archaeological investigation, historical analysis, and artistic interpretation create new opportunities for understanding Cleopatra's achievements, while also ensuring that her story will continue to evolve and adapt as new evidence emerges and new generations discover her biography for the first time. The global nature of contemporary communication and cultural exchange means that Cleopatra's story now reaches audiences throughout the world, creating opportunities for cross-cultural dialogue and mutual understanding as people from different backgrounds find common ground in their appreciation for her achievements, while also bringing their own cultural perspectives to bear on interpretation of her life and legacy. The enduring appeal of Cleopatra's biography ultimately stems from its combination of specific historical detail with universal human themes that speak to experiences and challenges that transcend particular cultural contexts or historical periods, making her story both a window into the ancient world and a mirror reflecting contemporary concerns about leadership, identity, power, and the human condition itself. The last pharaoh's eternal reign. As we reach the end of our journey through the remarkable life of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, we find ourselves confronting a paradox that speaks to the very nature of historical memory and cultural legacy. In death, Cleopatra has achieved the kind of immortality that her political struggles could never have secured, becoming not merely a figure from ancient history, but a permanent presence in human consciousness whose story continues to inspire, challenge, and illuminate the eternal questions that define our existence as thinking, feeling, striving beings caught between our limitless aspirations and our all-too finite capabilities. The woman who died by her own hand in Alexandria over 2,000 years ago has outlived not only the Roman Empire that conquered her kingdom, but every subsequent civilization that has claimed dominion over the Mediterranean world, proving that some victories transcend military conquest and political success to achieve the only form of permanence that mortal beings can ever hope to attain: the conquest of time itself through the power of story, the triumph of memory over oblivion, the persistence of meaning beyond the physical circumstances that initially gave it birth. Looking back across the sweep of Cleopatra's life, we can see how her story encompasses virtually every theme that makes human existence both magnificent and tragic. The pursuit of knowledge and wisdom in the face of ignorance and superstition, the struggle to preserve cultural identity while adapting to changing circumstances, the challenge of exercising power responsibly while navigating the treacherous currents of international politics, the attempt to balance personal desires with public duties, and ultimately the confrontation with mortality that awaits every individual regardless of their achievements or the scope of their ambitions. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony reveal how love and politics can become intertwined in ways that both elevate and destroy the people caught in their intersection, demonstrating that even the most sophisticated individuals cannot entirely separate their emotional lives from their professional responsibilities when they operate at the highest levels of power and influence. These partnerships show us both the possibilities and the dangers that arise when personal affection combines with strategic calculation, creating bonds that can reshape the world while also generating vulnerabilities that enemies can exploit with devastating effectiveness. The cultural synthesis that Cleopatra represented and promoted, the blending of Egyptian, Greek, and Roman traditions into new forms of artistic expression, intellectual inquiry, and spiritual exploration, provides a model for how different civilizations can interact productively while maintaining their distinctive characters, offering lessons that remain relevant in our own age of globalization and cultural exchange. Her ability to speak multiple languages, understand different religious traditions, and navigate complex diplomatic relationships demonstrates the kind of cultural competence that effective leadership requires in diverse, interconnected societies. But Perhaps most importantly, Cleopatra's story reminds us that individual excellence, no matter how remarkable, cannot guarantee success when confronted with historical forces that exceed any person's capacity to control or direct. Her intelligence, education, political skill, and cultural sophistication were genuine and extraordinary, yet they proved insufficient to preserve her kingdom's independence or secure her dynasty's survival when faced with Roman military superiority and imperial ambition backed by resources she could not match, despite Egypt's legendary wealth. Here's my final question for you, and I'm eager to hear perspectives from viewers around the world. What do you think Cleopatra's story teaches us about the relationship between individual agency and historical circumstances? From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably observed how even the most capable leaders can be overwhelmed by forces beyond their control, while also seeing examples of individuals who manage to influence events far beyond what their resources might have suggested possible. What do you think determines the difference? How do we balance realistic assessment of our limitations with the ambition necessary to attempt great things? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The Egypt that Cleopatra ruled was already an ancient civilization when she was born, its monuments and institutions having endured for nearly 3,000 years before her birth. Yet her reign marked the end of an era that would never return, demonstrating how even the most seemingly permanent human achievements remain subject to the larger rhythms of historical change that eventually transform or destroy everything that mortal hands have built. The irony is profound. She presided over the death of pharaonic Egypt while simultaneously ensuring its cultural immortality through the dramatic power of her own story. The lessons that contemporary leaders can draw from studying Cleopatra's reign extend far beyond the specific circumstances of ancient Mediterranean politics to encompass universal principles about effective governance, successful diplomacy, cultural leadership, and the requirements for maintaining authority in complex, rapidly changing environments. Her approaches to managing cultural diversity, building international alliances, promoting economic development, and maintaining popular support while navigating external pressures provide insights that remain relevant for anyone seeking to understand how leadership functions in challenging circumstances. The feminist implications of Cleopatra's story continue to evolve as each generation discovers new aspects of her achievements and encounters new evidence about the obstacles she overcame, and the innovations she pioneered in exercising political authority as a woman in male-dominated ancient societies. Her example demonstrates both the possibilities and the persistent challenges that face female leaders who must prove their competence while also managing cultural expectations and prejudices that their male counterparts rarely have to confront. The artistic and literary tradition that has grown up around Cleopatra's biography represents one of humanity's richest examples of how historical figures can become archetypal representations of universal themes and experiences, providing raw material that successive generations of creators have transformed into works of lasting beauty and significance. From ancient Roman poetry through Renaissance drama to contemporary film and literature, her story has provided inspiration for artistic achievements that enrich human culture while also ensuring that her memory remains vivid and accessible to new audiences discovering her biography for the first time. The archaeological work that continues at sites associated with Cleopatra's reign promises to generate new discoveries that may further revise our understanding of her achievements and the civilization she represented. As advanced technologies allow researchers to explore underwater ruins, analyze ancient documents, and reconstruct historical environments with unprecedented accuracy and detail. These ongoing investigations ensure that our knowledge of her story will continue to evolve and deepen as new evidence emerges and new analytical techniques become available. The global reach of contemporary communication means that Cleopatra's story now serves as a point of cultural connection for people from radically different backgrounds who can find common ground in their appreciation for her achievements while also bringing their own cultural perspectives and historical experiences to bear on interpretation of her life and legacy. This international dialogue enriches our understanding while also demonstrating how certain human experiences transcend particular cultural contexts to speak to universal aspects of the human condition. The educational value of studying Cleopatra's reign lies not only in the historical knowledge it provides, but in its capacity to illuminate broader questions about leadership, power, cultural identity, international relations, and personal responsibility that remain central to human experience, regardless of technological change or social transformation. Her story provides both inspiration and cautionary lessons, showing us what individual excellence can achieve, while also revealing the limitations that even the most remarkable people must accept when confronting forces larger than themselves. Looking toward the future, it seems certain that Cleopatra's story will continue to evolve and adapt as new generations discover her biography and find in it themes that speak to their own concerns and challenges. The specific details of ancient Egyptian politics may become increasingly remote from contemporary experience, but the human themes embedded in her story, the pursuit of knowledge, the exercise of power, the navigation of complex relationships, the confrontation with mortality, will remain relevant as long as humans retain their current emotional and intellectual makeup. In the end, perhaps the most remarkable thing about Cleopatra VII is not that she ruled Egypt or allied herself with the greatest Romans of her age or died dramatically by her own hand, but that her story continues to live and grow in human imagination more than 2,000 years after the historical circumstances that created it have faded into academic study and archaeological reconstruction. She achieved through the power of narrative what her political struggles could never have secured, a form of immortality that transcends the rise and fall of empires and the transformation of civilizations. The last pharaoh of Egypt may have lost her kingdom and her life, but she won something far more precious and enduring, a permanent place in the collective memory of humanity, ensuring that as long as people continue to tell stories about love and power, ambition and tragedy, wisdom and folly, her name will be remembered and her achievements celebrated. In choosing to die as a pharaoh rather than live as a Roman captive, she secured not only her dignity but her legend, proving that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that can only be achieved through apparent defeat. Cleopatra's reign may have ended in 30 BCE, but her influence on human culture and imagination continues to this day, making her not just the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt, but the eternal queen of human storytelling, forever young, forever brilliant, forever fascinating to new generations, who discover in her biography reflections of their own hopes, fears, dreams, and struggles. The Alexandria she ruled has largely disappeared beneath the Mediterranean waves, but the Alexandria of human imagination remains as magnificent as ever, presided over by a queen whose story will never end as long as humans remain. Curious about the past, and inspired by examples of individual excellence in the face of impossible odds. Thank you for joining me on this epic journey through the life and times of one of history's most remarkable figures. Whether you're watching from Cairo or California, from Mumbai or Manchester, from Sao Paulo or Seoul, you've become part of a global conversation that has been continuing for over 2 millennia. If you enjoyed this exploration of Cleopatra's story, like and subscribe for more deep dives into the personalities and events that have shaped our world. And remember, in studying the past, we not only honor those who came before us, but better, understand the challenges and opportunities that await us in our own time. The last pharaoh is gone, but her legacy lives on in every person who dares to dream of greatness, who refuses to accept defeat, and who believes that individual excellence can make a difference in a world that often seems indifferent to human aspirations. In that sense, we are all heirs to Cleopatra's kingdom, the realm of imagination where courage, intelligence, and determination can still change the world. one story at a time. Cleopatra and Ancient Egypt, the last pharaoh. Complete video script.